Now, this is the question, and to begin with, let me say that every country or group of countries can learn from the experiences of other countries. As an illustration of this thinking, let me remind that the democratic experience of ancient Greece has been an inspiration for virtually every current democratic regime in the world. In France, maybe it's the same here, but in France at least, young lawyers get in touch with constitutional law, notably by learning ancient Greece democratic practice. But this is one thing to get inspired by others' experiences. This is another thing to reproduce, to copy what has been done by others. Inspiration is not reproduction. And inspiration seems far more attractive, in my view, than reproduction, at least in theory, as it leads to adaptations, improvements, progress, and finally, brand new experience. Now, during this conference, I will show that in Europe's first movement in the early years of the European Union construction was to reproduce the experience of the United States of America. It discovered quite soon that it was useless. And progressively, the European Union, the European states elaborated their own way with the creation of the European Economic Community. I will then show that the necessity and the chaotic course of history led to the creation of what we call now the European Union, which is not a very old creation. It has been created in 1992. From there, we will be able to put the following question. Is the European Union a model to be reproduced elsewhere? In my view, and this is something I tell right now, but it will be my conclusion, but in order to maybe keep you interested during the following minutes, in my view, my conclusion is that if the European experience has a lesson to give, it is this one. Find your own way. I strongly think that the experience of the European Union is unique and that it would be wrong to try to reproduce it elsewhere, even if, of course, European experience, European successes and failures can inspire other group of countries in order for them to find their own ways. So, let me begin with the first idea, which is to show that Europe's first movement was to reproduce the United States of America's experience. Now, in some respect, indeed, the idea of creating a more united Europe has been initially inspired by the United States of America's experience. The first person who claimed that the European states should reproduce the American experience was Victor Hugo. It's a very well-known French writer, maybe you know him, and he had this vote in 1847. Now, the first political input in favor of a united Europe during the modern time is not Victor Hugo. It's due to the edition of a book titled Pan-Europe, written by Koudenov-Kalergi in 1923. He was a diplomat from Austria. He later initiated a movement, a political movement, which is the Pan-European Union in 1926, which is still in existence. And it is common ground, it is quite true, that this movement had at its goal, and still has at its goal, to create in the European continent something like the United States of America. Now, other very famous statesmen followed the train, like a very well-known French politic, which was Aristide Briand, and he followed the train from 1929. Obviously, the Second World War broke these movements, and it stopped during the war. After the Second World War, and in reaction to the horrors of the war, federalist movements reactivated themselves and pushed stronger for the creation of the United States of Europe. And one famous person who pleaded for that was obviously Winston Churchill, and he pronounced a conference in 1946 or 47, I'm not quite sure, in which he said, amongst other things, it was a very nice discourse in Zurich. He said, we must build a kind of United States of Europe. This movement was strong, and it led to something which is the so-called Council of Europe in 1949. The Council of Europe is due to this political dynamic which was elaborated, which was pushed by the federalist movement. But the Council of Europe is very far from resembling to any kind of federation of states. It is not that at all. The UK, this time, did not want of a federation of European states. Churchill wanted, but he was not in power anymore when he said that. And UK was against, as it is still today against the federation for political reasons. Now, the Council of Europe could not be a federation of states, obviously, but it's an important institution in the European continent because it is dealing with human rights. Now, the Council of Europe is a very classical international organization. It's not an organization of integration because the power is exercised by the Council of Ministers, and the Council of Ministers is composed of representatives of the member states. So it is just an organization of cooperation. Now, progressively, it became a little bit more an organization of integration, thanks to the activity of the European Court of Justice, of the European Court of Human Rights. The European Court of Human Rights is obviously a body which we could call supranational. And this body renders very important decisions that change the shape of the European continent in the matter of the protection of human rights. Nevertheless, this is not a federation. This is not the United States of Europe, of course. But with the creation of the Council of Europe, the movement did not stop. The movement went on, and then comes the era of the European communities. Now, as you may know, the first European community has been the European Coal Steel Community, created as soon as 1951. It was clearly at this time envisaged as a step, but just a step on the road for a united Europe. But, and this is very important, it was not created mainly for this purpose of being a step. It was created mainly to face what was seen as a sort of structural threat to peace between France and Germany. In this regard, we can probably say that the idea of creating a federation of European nations was more an inspiration for finding practical solutions to a structural threat, rather than a clear political goal for Europeans. Now, let me explain that a little bit more. When the French Jean Monnet initiated the European Coal and Steel Community after the Second World War, it was essentially due to its conviction that if nothing of this kind was done, France and Germany would compete for the control of coal and steel extracted from the mines of the Ruhr, the Region Ruhr, which is in Germany. And that this competition for the control of coal and steel would cause very quickly new tensions between the two countries and maybe lead to new wars. So, at this time, you must understand that coal and steel were seen as essential for the war industry, so that the one who controlled them had a strategic advantage on the others. The question of who would control coal and steel was therefore a real matter of concern, a structural threat, as I said. And it is at this point that Jean Monnet conceived the creation of a new kind of international economic organization. He envisaged an organization establishing and managing a common market for coal and steel between the two countries, opened also to third countries. But the main point was to create this community between France and Germany and others. Establishing a free trade of coal and steel was, in his mind, a very good manner of neutralizing any competition for strategic control of coal and steel. If you can freely trade coal and steel, there is no problem of control. No one controls, but everyone can buy and produce. So, in practice, the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, which is an organization, was supposed to guarantee the neutralization of the competition between France and Germany for the assets necessary for the war. Now, Robert Schuman, a French minister, said the following when the project was launched, which shows quite clearly what was the objective. He said, by pooling basic production means putting together the production, and by getting up a new higher authority, a controller, which would be supranational, whose decision will be binding in France, Germany, and other member countries. These proposals will build the first concrete foundation of the European Federation, which is indispensable to the preservation of peace. So, I think that a lot of you translate what I said to their neighbors. It is very, very nice. Thank you. As can be seen, the objective of the creation of the European coal and steel industry was, in Jean Monnet's mind, to generate a first federal experience for Europe. It was the first federal experience for Europe, but focused on a single domain, which is coal and steel. But beyond any idealistic approach of this notion of federation, the truth is that providing the capacity of Western Europe to unite itself just a few years after its self-destruction in the Second World War was a very important political message to the world, and especially to the USSR, which was engaged in an expansionist policy. Now, as you may know, 6 European states decided to join this organization, which we call a community. Now, you see the countries: France, Federal Republic of Germany, Italy, the 3 main countries, and 3 smaller countries, which are the countries of Benelux, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. Now, in this treaty, what was? In this treaty was organized a common market, so a mechanism through which the trade of coal and steel was freed, was open to all. Second, it contained competition and merger rules. So competition rules are considered as very important in a common market to be organized. The community had also a competence to intervene in the social field, because of course there is a lot of employment, where there used to be a lot of employment in coal and steel industries at this time. It was a treaty in force for 50 years. So why? This is an interesting question. Do you know why this treaty was in force for 50 years? I don't know. But it was in force for 50 years. Now, it was a treaty establishing a high authority. The high authority was a body. Subsequently, it became the European Commission. But at this time, it was the high authority. It's a body independent from member states. It's a supranational body composed of 9 members, nominated by the states, but acting independently of the states. And this body had the complete decision-making power. It was this body who had the power to decide binding decisions on member states. And these members would act only in the pursuit of the common interest of all the member states, the common interest of the community as such. So this is this high authority which gave to this community the nature of an organization of integration. This is very important to have it in mind. This is the first kind in the world. It has been the first experience of an organization of integration. And the question is, what does it mean? It means that the power is no more in the hand of the states. It's in the hands of a common body acting for the general interest of all the states. Now, this common market of coal and steel was a first step for a larger federalization of Europe. It was a first step. It was conceived like that. And so, it was a promising experience because it worked. It worked very well. But unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, the next step failed short. Too much too soon, the born dead European Community of Defense in 1954. Now, the ratification of the European Coal and Steel Community Treaty was quickly followed by another project inspired by the same Jean Monnet, who was a very active man during his life, and sponsored by the United States of America. This was a project of creating a European Community of Defense. So it was related to defense, to weapons, to the army. Now, the idea behind this proposition was that Western Europe should strengthen its military defense because it was confronted to the threat of the USSR. And so Western Europe. Now, it's very simple to understand what happens after the crisis. After the crisis, the global financial crisis, we had our own European crisis. It was the crisis of the euro. The euro was about to disappear because it has been built quite with absurdity on the following assumption. 18 states would have the same currency, but each and every of these 18 states would have their own national economic policy. One currency, 18 different economic policies. It simply does not work. It could work if each and every of these national economic policies were considered as good policies. But the problem is that we discovered at the end of after 2007, we discovered that some states had bad policies, like Greece, for example, maybe France, I would say, because France is not really respecting its commitments, but some states had bad policies contrasted with other states which had good policies. And the problem is that in this context, the good one pay for the bad one, and they won't accept it. So when this became apparent, the euro was about to collapse, and the European construction was about to fail. It was very close, just some years ago. But finally, the European states found a way to go further, to go to a further step toward a kind of federalization of their economy. Nowadays, they commit themselves with real law, hard law, to respect a rule that limits their deficit to 3% of the budget. This is quite technical, I won't answer into it. And this rule is controlled by the Commission and by the European Court. Conclusion. I know you want to go to the toilets. I have been a judge at the period of my life, and sometimes when you're a judge and you're judging in the morning, you get into the room at 8 after drinking coffees, and you get out of the room at noon. It's an experience. Now, I will free you in a minute after my conclusion. Now, of course, the European integration process is not achieved. It is still an ongoing process, and we will face new challenges, and maybe it will collapse. Maybe it will improve itself. I don't know. But at this stage, what could we learn from what has been accomplished? Let me propose 3 lessons. First, it seems to be quite clear that the creation of the common market has brought to the European people a level of economic prosperity that they would never had before. They would never have had without the EEC and subsequently the Union. In my view, economic integration brings economic prosperity. But, and this is very important, the fact that in some regions of Europe, or even in some member states, the chances to develop prosperity is better than in other places in Europe, generates a kind of discrimination, a natural discrimination. Some regions are naturally rich, others are most poor. And these discriminations, these natural discriminations, are amplified by a common market. They are amplified. And if nothing is done to correct this amplification, the whole story will stop. People accept to be poor in a country, rich in another. So there must exist some level of solidarity between the states and the regions of the integrated organization. Economic solidarity is not natural. What is mine is mine. I won't share it. It's not natural to share between states. It's difficult to put this in place. The European Union succeeded until now. I hope it will succeed in the future to go on this way. Second, a process of integration cannot be based only on ideas, theories, sweet dreams. It is not the case that the European Union derived from the thoughts and wills of a bunch of men sharing the same dream that Europe becomes like the United States of America. It does not work this way. Certainly, leading statesmen in Europe have always felt that Europe was a vital necessity. But the institutional shape of Europe is nothing but a progressive construction and pragmatic construction, each stone of which being pragmatic responsive to successive challenges, threats, and crises. There is no move for the accomplishment of someone's dream. There is no move when there are no threats. There are moves when there is a threat, when there is a crisis, and at this moment there is always a choice. Go back or go further. What characterized the European story is that each time they went further. Save, probably in 1954, with the failure of the community of defense. Third, and finally, the process of integration cannot succeed if it's not based on the rule of law. Under the effective and efficient judicial review of a respected court in partnership with domestic judges and maybe to some extent with national lawyers. It is because lawyers know European law that European law exists in Wales. So, finally, are these lessons useful for Latin America? Well, as I said, I do not think that the European Union can be a model to be happily reproduced elsewhere. Other regional integration processes must find their own way, thanks to you, probably. But of course, they can be inspired by the failures and successes of the European story. And to this extent, maybe find out some lessons that could be useful. Thank you for your attention.